It was a quiet night at the observatory. The sky was clear and the stars shone brightly above the hills. Most of the team had gone home, leaving only a few scientists still at work. Among them was Dr. Cameron, a man who rarely left before sunrise. He had a habit of staying longer than others, checking the machines and rereading the data. That night, something unusual caught his attention. The monitor showed a series of repeating signals. At first, he thought it was a simple glitch. Machines often picked up interference from satellites, airplanes, or even weather changes. But when he looked closer, the pattern seemed different. It wasn't random static. It carried a rhythm, almost like a coded message. His eyes widened, and he leaned closer to the screen. For the next hour, he recorded everything. The signal came, in pulses, short, long, then short again. It reminded him of Morse code, but it wasn't any Earth language he knew. Excited yet cautious, he saved the data and cross-checked it with known space signals. Nothing matched. He called one of his colleagues, a young researcher named Aisha, who was just about to leave the building. "Aisha, wait, look at this," Cameron said, pointing at the monitor. She returned, a little annoyed at first, but as soon as she saw the screen, her face changed. "This isn't satellite interference," she whispered. "It looks intentional." They both stayed up all night, comparing the signal to other recordings. Each time, the pattern repeated in the same way. There was no doubt now. This was not just background noise from space. Someone, or something, was sending a message. Theo. Next morning, they presented their findings to the rest of the team. Some were curious, others skeptical. Dr. Malik, the head of the observatory, frowned as he listened. "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof," he reminded them. "We cannot jump to conclusions. It could be a natural source we haven't studied before." But Cameron and Aisha were not convinced. They noticed details in the signal. Certain sequences that repeated every few minutes, as if trying to get attention. To them, it felt like a voice, crying out from across the stars. Over the following weeks, the team worked tirelessly to decode the signal. Computers were programmed to search for patterns, and the data was fed into translation models. They stayed, late at night, eating cold meals at their desks, their eyes glued to the monitors. With each passing day, the signal grew clearer. At first, it was only shapes and sounds. Then came fragments of words, though not in any language known on Earth. Yet the rhythm carried meaning, like a song with feelings attached. The more they listened, the more they felt something human in it: desperation, urgency, even fear. Finally, one evening, Aisha ran into the lab with tears in her eyes. "I think I understand it," she said breathlessly. "It's a plea. They're asking for help." The room went silent. Everyone stared at her. She explained how the signal contained repeating phrases that, when matched with universal symbols, translated into words like danger, collapse, and assistance. It was the clearest proof yet that the message came from intelligent beings. The discovery should have been celebrated, but instead it brought confusion. What should they do next? If they went public, people might laugh at them, or worse, accuse them of spreading lies. Governments might try to take control of the observatory, shutting them out of their own research. Cameron felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He stood by the window late that night, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, far beyond human reach, a civilization was in trouble. They had managed to send their voice across the void, hoping someone would hear, and somehow by chance or destiny, that someone was him and his team. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how fragile life truly was. Here on Earth, people fought over land, power, and wealth. Yet in the vastness of space, another world was crying for help. Would Earth ignore them? Would their cries fade into silence, leaving them alone in their suffering? The next day, he called an urgent meeting. "We cannot ignore this," he told his colleagues. "If what Aisha says is true, then someone is reaching out to us. Even if the world does not believe, we must keep working. We owe it to them and to ourselves to listen. Some nodded in agreement, though others still doubted. But in the end, they all knew they could not walk away. The signal was too clear, too important. They decided to continue their research. In secret, away from unnecessary attention. Weeks turned into months. The team grew more skilled at decoding the messages. Slowly, a picture began to form of the ones behind the signal. They were advanced beings, far more intelligent than humans in some ways, yet helpless in others. Their world was facing a disaster they could not stop alone. Entire cities were failing, and their survival depended on reaching someone who could hear them. Every night as the scientists worked, the same thought echoed in their minds. Why us? Why Earth? Perhaps it was chance, or perhaps it was fate. Whatever the reason, they were chosen to hear a voice that no one else could. And while most of the world carried on, unaware of what was happening in the sky, a small team of dreamers, in a lonely observatory, listened to the cry of a queen and her people. They didn't yet know what would come of it, or how the world would respond. But they knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The signal did not stop. Night after night it returned, steady and strong like a heartbeat from far away. The scientists at the observatory had grown used to hearing it, almost like a familiar voice calling from the darkness of space. But with each decoding attempt, the message became clearer, and with clarity came a sense of responsibility that none of them had ever imagined carrying. The hidden words inside the signal were like pieces of a puzzle. At first, they were fragments, half-formed, meanings that seemed impossible to understand. But slowly, patterns emerged. Aisha was the first to notice that some parts repeated in a cycle. She pointed it out one evening when the team gathered around the computers. "Look," she said, tapping the screen. "This section keeps coming back every few hours. It's not random. It's a title, or maybe a name." Dr. Cameron leaned closer. "A name?" "Yes," she whispered. "I think it means queen." The room fell silent. A queen. The idea felt strange, almost like something out of a storybook. Yet here it was, hidden in the numbers and signals. As they decoded more, they realized the message came not from an individual, but from a leader, a ruler who spoke for her people. Over time, the scientists pieced together more details. They learned of a civilization far beyond Earth, living under a queen who had ruled for many years. Her words were heavy with worry, and though her language was alien, the feelings were universal. Fear, loss, urgency, hope. She spoke of disasters that had struck their world. Massive storms tore through their lands. Energy sources that once fueled. Their cities were breaking down. Entire regions were collapsing, and their own advanced technology could not stop the destruction. The queen begged for help, her voice carrying across the stars, reaching a world she did not even know existed. The scientists could hardly believe what they were uncovering. "They know they're not alone," Aisha whispered one night. "That's why they sent this message. They believe someone is out there who can help them." But as hopeful as the signal sounded, the scientists faced a heavy problem. What could Earth possibly offer? Humans were still struggling with their own challenges: wars, poverty, disease, and climate issues. If these beings were more advanced than humans, how could Earth save them? The debate divided the group. Some argued it was not their responsibility. "We can't even solve our own problems," one of the researchers said during a late-night discussion. "How can we save another world? This is impossible." But others, especially Cameron, disagreed. He believed the message was more than just a cry for help. It was also a test. "Maybe it's not about what we have," he said firmly. "Maybe it's about whether we choose to care. They reached out because they believe someone somewhere will listen. We can't prove them wrong by turning away." Despite his passion, convincing others outside the observatory was not easy. When the team tried to share their findings with government officials, most dismissed them. Some laughed, saying the scientists were wasting their time chasing imaginary signals. Others warned them not to spread such claims, fearing it would cause panic or ridicule. The rejection hurt, but the team refused to stop. They decided to keep their work hidden from the public for now, continuing quietly in their observatory. They knew the Queen's voice could not wait for politics or debates. Every day lost might mean more lives lost on her world. The scientists built new decoding programs, working late into the night. They ate little, slept less, and gave all their energy to the task. The more they learned, the closer they felt to the mysterious beings on the other side. One evening, while reviewing the newest translation, Cameron noticed something that made him freeze. He called the others immediately. "Look here," he said, pointing at a line of code. "This isn't just a plea, it's coordinates." They leaned closer, studying the numbers. It was a location, far outside the known map of human exploration. The Queen was not just asking for help in words, she was giving directions, showing them where her people lived. The discovery shook them all. It was the clearest proof yet that this was no random signal. It was real. A world, a civilization, a queen. They were out there waiting, but with proof came new fear. If they revealed the coordinates, powerful groups might try to exploit the information. Military forces might use it for their own gain. Companies might see it as a chance for resources. The thought of Earth responding with greed instead of compassion filled the scientists with dread. So they made a difficult choice. They kept the coordinates secret, locked in their own records, known only to the team. They would continue working quietly until they were sure what steps to take. The weight of the secret grew heavier each day. Cameron often stayed by himself in the observatory late at night, staring at the stars. He thought about the Queen, a ruler far away who must have been desperate enough to send her voice into the unknown. He imagined her standing among her people, telling them to have faith, to believe that someone would hear them. Sometimes he wondered if she thought her message had failed. Did she imagine that her words were lost in space, never to be answered? Or did she still believe, somewhere deep inside, that help would come? The more Cameron thought about it, the more determined he became. He whispered into the dark sky one night as if the Queen could somehow hear him. "We hear you," he said softly. "You are not alone." The team worked harder than ever, driven not just by science but by empathy. Each new discovery brought them closer to the Queen's story. They learned about her people's traditions, their love for their world, and their determination to survive despite the odds. The message was not just a technical broadcast. It carried emotions, stories, and dreams. And so, while the rest of Earth remained unaware, a small group of scientists continued to carry the burden of a hidden truth. They had uncovered the voice of a queen and her people, begging across the stars. They knew the world might not believe them, but that no longer mattered. What mattered was that the voice had been heard, and they had chosen not to turn away. Somewhere, far away, on a planet collapsing under disaster, the Queen and her forces waited in silence, not knowing that their cry for help had already touched human hearts. They feared they were being ignored, but the truth was very different. The story of their message was only beginning, and soon it would change everything. Weeks passed, but the scientists did not stop working. The signal was now more familiar to them than their own voices. It became a part of their lives, like a constant companion from the skies. Every time it returned, stronger and clearer, they felt the presence of the one behind it, the Queen and her people. Dr. Cameron often wondered if the Queen believed anyone was listening. Did she imagine her words were reaching an empty void never to be answered? He could not stand that thought. He wanted her to know that her voice was not lost, that someone on Earth was listening carefully. So one night, after long discussions, the team made a bold decision. They would try to respond. It was not easy. Earth's communication systems were designed for satellites and spacecraft, not for sending signals across unimaginable distances. The observatory was not built for this kind of task either. But the scientists were determined. They restructured old equipment, rewired antennas, and created a system that could send a pulse strong enough to ride through space. The first attempt was simple. They sent back a repeating pattern, a mirror of the Queen's own signal, as if saying, "We hear you. We are here." After that, Silence filled the observatory. Days went by with no reply, and some began to lose hope. Perhaps the message had not traveled far enough. Perhaps the Queen's people could not hear it, or worse, they had already fallen to the disaster she described. But then, one night, when the team was almost ready to give up, something extraordinary happened. The observatory shook, lights flickered, the machines buzzed and screens glowed brighter than ever before. The team rushed to their stations thinking there was a power surge. But then, in the middle of the lab, something appeared. A shimmering light began to form, like a fog of silver, threads weaving together. The scientists gasped as the fog shaped itself into a figure, a tall, graceful figure that stood before them as if it had stepped through the stars. It was her, the alien queen. She was unlike anything they had ever seen. Her presence was commanding, yet there was sorrow in her eyes. She stood tall, her form glowing with soft colors that shifted like water. Behind her, faint outlines of other figures appeared, her forces, standing in silence as if waiting for her command. The scientists froze, unable to believe their eyes. It was not a recording or a trick. This was a direct communication, a projection from across the cosmos, brought to life inside their observatory. For a moment, no one spoke. The Queen looked around at the humans, her gaze steady yet full of hope. Then, in a voice that was both strange and clear, she spoke. "You heard us." The room went silent again. Every breath held. Then Cameron, his voice shaking, whispered, "Yes, we heard you." The Queen's expression softened, though her face still carried the weight of fear. She spoke slowly, her words forming through the translators the scientists had built from the signal. "We feared no one would answer. For many cycles, we sent our cries into the darkness. We thought the stars had ignored us, but you listened." Her voice filled the room with a mixture of strength and sorrow. She told them about her world, once bright and thriving, now falling apart. She explained how storms tore through their lands, how energy cores that sustained their cities were failing. Her forces, though strong and loyal, could not fight against the disaster. They needed help, resources, ideas, anything that could give them hope. The scientists listened in silence, overwhelmed. A queen from another world was standing before them, pleading for help. This was not science fiction anymore. This was real. Aisha finally gathered the courage to speak. "We want to help you," she said softly, "but we are not as advanced as you. We don't know if we can do enough." The Queen looked at her with kind but determined eyes. Help is not always about strength. Sometimes it is about compassion. We reached across the stars not because we needed power, but because we needed kindness. And you answered. Her words struck the humans deeply. They realized that even if Earth did not have all the answers, the simple act of listening and trying mattered more than anything. The Queen's forces who stood behind her finally moved. They bowed their heads toward the humans, a gesture of respect. It was clear. They were placing their trust in them. The scientists exchanged looks. The world outside would never believe this. Even their governments would likely call it a trick. But inside that observatory, they knew the truth. After the projection faded, the room remained silent for a long time. The scientists were still in shock. It was Cameron who finally spoke. "She came here. She trusted us. We can't stop now. We must find a way to help." From that night on, the team worked harder than ever. They studied the Queen's words, recorded every detail of her projection, and began planning how to respond. They knew the task ahead was impossible by ordinary measures, but they were no longer afraid. The Queen's appearance had changed everything. What began as a strange signal had now become a bond, a bridge between two worlds. And though Earth's leaders still doubted, and though the future was uncertain, one truth was clear. The Queen's voice had been heard, and her people would not be ignored. For the first time in history, humanity had been called to act not just as a single nation, but as a part of something far greater. The scientists looked at the stars with new eyes. Somewhere out there, an entire world was waiting, believing that help would come. And now it was up to them to make sure that promise was not broken. The days after the Queen's projection were unlike anything the scientists had ever experienced. They could hardly sleep, their minds racing with possibilities. They replayed the recording of her words again and again, searching for every detail. The observatory no longer felt like an ordinary building. It had become a bridge between two worlds. But outside the observatory, things were different. When the scientists cautiously shared part of their findings with government officials, the reaction was disappointing. Some leaders dismissed the report completely, calling it a hoax. Others were suspicious and worried that the discovery might cause unrest among people. There were even a few who whispered about using the Queen's location for their own advantage, treating it as a resource to exploit rather than a call for help. Dr. Cameron was deeply troubled by this. One evening, while walking back from a meeting with officials, he told Aisha, "We cannot wait for governments to believe us. By the time they are ready, it may be too late for her people." Aisha nodded firmly. "Then we do what we can. Even if it is small, it will matter." She trusted us first, not them. And so the team decided to work in secret, gathering whatever they could to prepare some form of aid. They did not have starships or advanced technology, but they had knowledge, compassion, and determination. They began creating messages filled with information about Earth's medicines, engineering ideas, and survival methods. They also collected samples of plants, seeds, and designs for clean energy systems. If there was a way to send these through communication or in physical form one day, they would be ready. At the same time, the Queen's forces continued to send more signals, now clearer than ever. They shared glimpses of their world, broken cities, darkened skies, and people struggling to survive. The images shook the scientists' hearts. These were not just distant aliens. They were families, children, elders, living beings just like humans, caught in a struggle against nature and time. Despite the seriousness of the situation, something else began to grow between the two sides. Trust. The Queen and her forces no longer looked at Earth with doubt. They saw kindness in the humans who listened. And the scientists no longer feared the unknown. They saw the Queen and her people as allies, even friends. The alliance, however, was not without challenges. Some on Earth who learned of the secret tried to interfere. Rumors spread among certain groups, and strange power failures occurred at the observatory. As if someone wanted to shut their work down, the scientists worked carefully, keeping their activities hidden from prying eyes. They knew that not everyone on Earth was ready to accept the truth, but they also knew they could not stop. Then came a breakthrough. The Queen shared fragments of her people's technology, sending designs through the same holographic signals. The scientists were astonished. Some of the devices were far beyond human understanding, but others could be adapted with existing Earth tools. Together, they began working on a hybrid project, combining human resourcefulness with alien knowledge. The project was not easy. There were failures, broken machines, and endless nights of frustration. But slowly, progress was made. The team built small models of energy stabilizers, machines that could capture and store energy in new ways. These were the same types of devices the Queen's people desperately needed. For the first time, the scientists felt they were not just listening, they were truly helping. When they sent back the blueprints of the completed models, the Queen's projection appeared again. Her eyes, though still tired, carried a spark of hope. She thanked them, bowing her head in gratitude. Her forces stood tall behind her, no longer in despair but with renewed courage. It was a moment of triumph. Both worlds had reached across the stars and touched each other, not with weapons or greed, but with trust and compassion. Still, the path ahead was long. The Queen warned them that the disasters were growing worse. Her people were running out of time. The Alliance had to move faster if they wanted to save lives. The scientists promised her they would not stop. And so, an unlikely friendship grew, stronger. A queen from a distant world and a small group of humans on Earth had joined hands, different in form but united in purpose. Their work was not just about survival anymore. It was about proving that even in the vast emptiness of the universe, compassion could build bridges where fear once stood. The world outside still doubted, but inside the observatory, history was being written quietly. An alliance had begun, one that would forever change the meaning of humanity's place among the stars. The work grew harder as time went on. The disasters on the Queen's world became more severe. Each new message from her carried more urgency. Entire regions were being lost to violent storms, energy shortages, and collapsing systems. Her people were holding on with bravery, but they could not endure forever. The scientists on Earth felt the pressure like never before. Every day, they asked themselves the same question. Would they be able to help in time? They had managed to create models, designs, and solutions, but the real challenge was distance. How could they send what they built across the stars? One evening, as the team sat in silence after another failed test, Aisha spoke. Maybe we are thinking too small. We don't have to save the entire planet. We just have to give them one step forward. One tool, one idea, one chance. Her words struck everyone deeply. They realized they did not need to solve everything at once. They only needed to bring hope, something the Queen and her people desperately needed. With renewed spirit, they focused on simpler projects, ways to purify water, grow food in harsh conditions, and repair failing systems with basic resources. They translated these ideas into the universal symbols they had created with the Queen's language. It was not much, but it was real, practical, and life-saving. When they finally sent the full package of knowledge through their communication systems, the Queen appeared once again in the observatory. This time, her voice was not heavy with despair. It carried strength. You did not ignore us, she said, her eyes bright. You gave us hope when we had none. Your kindness will be remembered for all cycles to come. Her forces bowed deeply, not as soldiers, but as survivors thanking their allies. The scientists felt tears in their eyes. They were only a small group of ordinary people, but their choice to listen had changed the fate of another world. Back on Earth, the news had not yet spread. Most people still went about their daily lives, unaware of the alliance forming quietly above their heads. But the scientists knew the truth. They had witnessed history, two civilizations uniting not for conquest but for survival and friendship. Over time, the Queen's people began to recover. With the shared knowledge, they stabilized parts of their world. It was not perfect, and many challenges remained, but there was light where there had once been only darkness. And on Earth, the scientists also changed. They no longer looked at the night sky with the same eyes. The stars were not just distant points of light anymore. They were neighbors, friends, voices waiting to be heard. The Queen's people had begged for assistance, believing they would be ignored. But instead, they were answered. That answer became more than survival. It became a reminder to all who were part of it that kindness, even from the smallest group, could echo across galaxies. The story of the Queen and the scientists was never shouted loudly across Earth. It lived quietly, in the hearts of those who had been there. But its meaning was greater than any fame or recognition. It proved that in the vast universe, no cry for help is too small, and no act of compassion is ever wasted.